Her name is Phyllis Barkey. You might recognize her from some other programs that we've had here before. Her tea journey began in 1998. She retired from a 22-year administrative assistant position in 2004 to pursue her interest in the world of tea, and many rewarding experiences have resulted. Currently, she is the tea director at the Whitney restaurant in Detroit. She has a tea-themed blog called The Relevant Tea Leaf. She enjoys speaking for historical societies, libraries, tea rooms, church and civic groups, senior centers on numerous subjects and personalities. But she's here to share with us Lucille Ball this afternoon, so please help me welcome Phyllis Barkey.
Thank you, Stephanie, and I'm so glad to be back here today. Lucille Ball fans are known as Luciphiles, and it looks like we have a room full of Luciphiles. Everybody loves Lucy. If I were to go around and ask each of you, I'm sure each one of you would have a different episode or story about Lucy that is just your favorite. No single television series has ever brought more laughter and enjoyment to people than I Love Lucy. Lucy and Desi had no idea their series would be a hit, much less an unequaled classic. The 179 half-hour CBS episodes filmed from 1951 through 1957 were produced in what is now called the golden age of television. We don't really have the options now that we had back then, do we? Since the last episode aired on May 6, 1957, I Love Lucy has been playing almost continuously around the clock somewhere in the world. It's the most watched TV show in history with over 1 billion viewers, and it's translated into dozens of languages. It was voted the best TV show of all time in 2012 in a viewer poll that was conducted by People Magazine and ABC News. CBS, just in case you want to jot this down so you don't forget it, CBS will air the I Love Lucy Christmas special that was filmed on Christmas Eve, 1956, on Friday, December the 14th at 8 p.m. So that might be something you want to tune in for. Few people have a monopoly over a name like Lucille Ball, but anywhere in the world where I Love Lucy has been seen, the name Lucy can only mean one person. Season 2, episode 39, was called Job Switching, and it's known as one of the crown jewels of the I Love Lucy episodes. Just to recap the episode, Lucy was in trouble with Ricky over the household finances, specifically bouncing checks. When Ricky showed her a bounce check from the beauty shop, Lucy replied, "I write a check to the beauty parlor every month." Ricky said, "Yes, I know that, but they don't always have a little note on the back like this one. Dear teller, be a lamb and don't put this through until next month." Now, what do you say for yourself? "That's why they call them tellers," Lucy replied. "They go around blabbing everything they know." Ricky and Fred thought the girls had it too easy staying at home, while Lucy and Ethel thought working outside the home wasn't all that difficult. So Lucy challenged them to switch roles for 1 week. The girls got a job at a chocolate factory, and you know where this is going. And Lucy's first assignment was candy dipping. The lady in the scene wasn't an actress, but a real candy dipper from See's Chocolates. If you recall, a fly landed on her nose, and Lucy attempted to slap it away with her chocolate-covered hands, getting chocolate all over her co-worker's face. A chocolate-slinging battle was supposed to ensue, but the lady was timid and reluctant to plaster Lucy's face with chocolate in retaliation. So a demonstration was given on how it should be done. When the actual filming resumed, the lady went from timid to overly aggressive, and director William Asher recalled how she almost broke Lucy's nose. But Lucy was tough and never let on. Lucy and Ethel were demoted to the candy wrapping department, and you probably remember the speeding conveyor belt disaster that was impossible for them to keep pace with. So they stuffed the candy in their mouths, blouses, and under their chef's hats in a frantic attempt to hide all the unwrapped chocolates from the supervisor. And of course, my outfit today is from that episode, and you see this little 10 poster of that same episode. It's probably the most recalled episode of all of her, of all the episodes, but there are some others that were pretty good too. Lucy is the small town gal whose grit and talents allowed her to persevere until she found her true calling after the age of 40. She became the all-time undisputed queen of comedy, but her life was filled with many challenges and sad experiences. Numerous biographies have been written about her containing both factual and inaccurate information. So today, I'm sharing primarily from her autobiography published in 1996, 7 years after her death. And this is the book. It's called Love, Lucy. It's her only autobiography, as told to Betty H. Hoffman, who taped all their interviews. The manuscript was buried in an old file box for 25 years. No one, except Betty Hoffman, knew it existed. And an attorney uncovered it while searching for a contract Lucy's children needed for her estate after her death in 1989. After many weeks of detective work, Lucy's children finally found Mrs. Hoffman. She told them in the early 1960s, Dr. Norman Vincent Peale encouraged Lucy to record her dramatic and challenging life. Knowing she was starring in a television series, running a studio, and trying to raise 2 teenagers, he suggested she work with someone on an as-told-to autobiography for both therapeutic reasons as well as for posterity. The 20 hours of interviews and transcription were spread out over 2 years, with Mrs. Hoffman traveling to Lucy's hometown of Jamestown, New York, to interview her childhood friends. The 300 pages of never-before-published writings covered Lucy's life up until 1964. And then, for reasons known only to Lucy, the project was shelved. When the manuscript was discovered, her children decided to share it with all her fans. The title is as she would have autographed the book, Love, Lucy. For information about her life after 1964, I switched to a book that was published in 1991. Ironically, 3 weeks before her death, Lucy agreed to begin work on another as-told-to autobiography with respected journalist and friend Bob Thomas. Either she had forgotten about the 300-page head start with Mrs. Hoffman, or she wanted to start over from scratch with someone entirely new. Her daughter Lucy remembered that she seemed completely overwhelmed by the task and didn't even know where or how to begin. As it turned out, her death ended the project before it ever began. So today, I'm going to share with you a pared down synopsis of this book, which I'm going to tell you in story form. Obviously, I couldn't tell you everything that's in the book or we'd be here all afternoon, but I picked what I thought were the best things to share with you. Lucille Desiree Ball was her birth name. Desiree after her mother, who told her that Lucille was French in origin and meant shining light. As a young model, however, Lucy thought her name should be more glamorous, so she changed it to Diane Belmont. Diane, because she always liked that name, and Belmont after the famous Belmont racetrack on Long Island. After a while, she decided phoniness wasn't for her, and she took back her birth name. She disliked the short nickname version of Lucy because she couldn't visualize it on the theater marquees. Desi began calling her Lucy shortly after they started dating. He said he never liked Lucille because that name had been used by other men. Lucy was his alone. Lucy was born on Sunday, August 6, 1911, in her grandparents' apartment in Jamestown, New York, delivered by her maternal grandmother, Flora Bell Hunt, who was a midwife and a practical nurse. Desiree Hunt, Lucy's mother, married Henry Durrell Ball at the age of 17 and moved to Butte, Montana, where Henry was employed as a telephone lineman. She returned to Jamestown to give birth to Lucy, but as soon as she was well enough to travel, they returned to Montana. Desiree said her husband was full of fun, and Lucy inherited his good comic sense. Lucy was an only child for almost 4 years and was the center of attention. She was never the prissy type, but loved roughhousing with her father, while Dee Dee, the name her mother went by, worried about the tomboy and daredevil Lucy was becoming. That demeanor served her well later in life when she fearlessly performed stunts that came naturally to her. Years later, she said, "I'm not funny. It's the script writers who are funny. What I am is brave. If they wanted to throw me into a cement mixer, I would try it. And if I came out alive, I'd say, okay, let's do it." When Lucy was just past 3 years old, she and her family moved to Wyandotte, Michigan. Did you know she lived in Michigan? Where Henry, her father, became a line crew foreman for the Michigan Bell Telephone. Dee Dee was 5 months pregnant. Sadly, Henry never lived to see his second child because he developed typhoid fever and died in March 1915 at 28 years of age. The young widow and her daughter returned to Jamestown, New York to bury their beloved and carry on with life. As a side note, the Bell family rented an apartment at the back of a house on Biddle Avenue. I grew up in Wyandotte, so I know the area quite well. In 1947, when Lucy was in the area for a theater event, she returned to Wyandotte to reconnect with the Daniels family who owned the house. Unfortunately, it was demolished in 1963. Meanwhile, back in Jamestown, Dee Dee and Lucy moved in with Dee Dee's parents, where she gave birth to a healthy boy in July 1915. He was named Fred after Dee Dee's father, and Lucy remembered feeling very jealous of him for a while. Dee Dee suffered depression after Freddie's birth, so she went to California for about a year. Freddie stayed with his maternal grandparents, while Lucy went to live with Dee Dee's younger sister, Lola. Lola was a beautician, so Lucy spent many days at her aunt's beauty shop instead of going to school. It was there she acquired a fondness for hairdressing that remained a hobby throughout her life. Her adulthood homes always had a room with salon equipment where she gave permanents and hair sets to family members and friends. She thought she was quite good at it, so they never told her any different. After 3 years of widowhood, Dee Dee married a Swede named Ed Peterson. Sadly for Lucy and Freddie, Ed never thought of himself as a father to them. Shortly after their marriage, the couple left for Detroit to look for jobs, leaving Lucy and Freddie behind again. Freddie, as before, stayed with his doting maternal grandparents, while Lucy was parceled out, as she put it, to Ed's parents. Lucy remembered them as hard, sour, cheerless people with old country ways. Her step-grandmother described her as a headstrong, sassy, bold, silly, and nervous child and punished her behavior frequently. Lucy had a very dramatic nature and reacted to everything. Things weren't all bad at Grandma Peterson's, however, because she taught Lucy to knit and crochet, a pastime she enjoyed throughout her entire life. Grandma Peterson had a green thumb, too, and Lucy credited her for her love of flowers and gardening. Lucy said the hard work, discipline, and perfectionist attitude she learned from Grandma Peterson didn't harm her. It actually served her well in adulthood. When Lucy was almost 9, Dee Dee and Ed returned from Detroit, and her maternal grandparents bought a house on the outskirts of town where the entire family could live together, including Aunt Lola and her young daughter Cleo. Lucy said being with her mother again seemed like the greatest thing that ever happened to her at that time in her life. She and Freddie called their Grandpa Hunt Daddy because he was their surrogate father after the death of their real father, and they loved the cozy house and life he provided for them. Lucy put together family productions that she, Freddie, and little Cleo starred in. The inspirations came from Celeron Amusement Park that was close to their home. There was no admission fee, so Lucy would take in all the events and activities during the summer months. Dee Dee was a wonderful pianist and tried to teach Lucy how to play the piano. She insisted that Lucy practice 1 hour every afternoon after school, determined that music would be instilled in her. And Lucy said that's just where it stayed, inside her. Lucy's beloved Grandma Hunt, the one who brought her into the world, developed cancer and died at age 51. Lucy, who cried hysterically at her father's funeral, was not allowed to attend her grandmother's funeral. She remembered carrying cut branches of blooming lilacs from their backyard to her grandma's grave every Memorial Day, and as a result, she developed a near obsession for lilacs. As an adult, she planned trips to New England in May just to see and smell the lilacs in bloom, since she wasn't able to grow them successfully in California. After Grandma Hunt died, 11-year-old Lucy suddenly found herself fulfilling her role as housekeeper, cook, and babysitter for 7-year-old Freddie and 3-year-old Cleo. Dee Dee and Lola worked outside the home to help with expenses. Lucy never felt unloved or unwanted, but being moved around a lot, combined with many deaths, made her childhood painful, and adolescence was almost as stormy. She had a red-headed temper, even though in those days she wasn't even a redhead. By the time she reached 13, a lot of pressure that had been building up for years suddenly came out. There were kicking, rolling, and biting fights on the school grounds with girls and even a few boys. She recalled getting so mad at her typing teacher on one occasion that she even threw the typewriter at her. The summer when Lucy was almost 15, she fell in love with Johnny DeVita, a 23-year-old guy from Jamestown. Dee Dee disapproved of the romance. Not only was he too old for her, but his father had ties with the mob. It wasn't until Lucy went to Hollywood that she completely got over him. When Lucy was a high school freshman, she and her girlfriend put on their first amateur production of Charlie's Aunt. Dee Dee made all their costumes. Lucy knew for the first time the wonderful feeling that comes from getting real laughs on the stage. That success encouraged her to get into as many musical and dramatic offerings as she could, both in school and outside of school. At 15, she was in a musical called The Scottish Rite Review at Jamestown Palace Theater, where she did an Apache dance with such fervor that she fell into the orchestra pit and dislocated her shoulder. Due to a sad crisis, the family lost their house when Lucy was 16, and they moved into an apartment in a nearby city. The house still stands and can be toured today. Have any of you been there? No? The move meant a strange new high school for Lucy in her junior year. She hated it and ran away often to Chicago, Cleveland, Buffalo, or anywhere she felt the urge to go. Dee Dee was beside herself with worry. One night at dinner, she asked, "Lucille, how would you like to go to drama school?" Lucy jumped at the chance. At 17, she didn't begin to have what it would take to succeed in show business, but she was eager to go to New York anyway. To save money, she lived with some elderly friends in Upper Manhattan. The school soon discovered she couldn't sing or dance and had a Midwestern accent. The students and teachers ignored her, and another student, Betty Davis, seemed to get all the raves. At the end of the term, the school wrote Dee Dee saying, "Lucy doesn't have what it takes to be an actress, and staying in school would be wasting your money." Not wanting to face embarrassment in Jamestown, Lucy decided to stay in New York City to try her luck at becoming a showgirl. Competition was fierce, and Lucy couldn't seem to get the hang of things, but she didn't give up. She said for some incomprehensible reason, she knew someday she'd make it as an actress, and she clung to the fact that hardly no one is successful overnight. But in the meantime, she had to eat. So she got a $25 a week job modeling coats. This was a short stint when she went by the name Diane Belmont. That job led to becoming a model at Hattie Carnegie's internationally famous dress shop on East 49th Street. Overnight, she found herself in a world of rich society women and glamorous movie stars. Lucy modeled long, slinky evening gowns and suits for $35 a week. Connie and Joan Bennett were frequent customers, and Lucy lost no time in bleaching her hair the color of Joan's and imitating her style, flat on top with dippy waves on each side. She recalled that at 18 years of age, she felt like a well-dressed dummy, but for the first time in her life, she got to meet people and see things. The job at Hattie's was followed by a modeling job in a first-class clothing house. The clothes were exquisite and expensive, but instead of socialites for customers, they had women department store buyers. The designer was Rosie Roth, a former partner of Hattie Carnegie's. Lucy was the 5-foot, 7.5-inch tall, 111-pound model with platinum blonde hair and blue eyes who always ended every fashion show as a bride. Her red hair didn't come until 1942 when she was in the movie Dewberry Was a Lady. Her natural hair color was chestnut brown. To earn more money, she often posed at night and on weekends for commercial illustrators. A freelance painter did an oil portrait of Lucy in one of Rosie's borrowed flowing chiffon dresses and sold it to Chesterfield Cigarettes. And overnight, Lucy's face and figure were on billboards all over New York City. A theatrical agent who always had her eyes open for young models to profitably export to Hollywood recognized Lucy and told her Sam Goldwyn needed a dozen well-known poster girls for a new musical extravaganza called Roman Scandals starring Eddie Cantor. The job guaranteed $125 a week for 6 weeks plus transportation. Lucy was off for Hollywood. Never in her wildest dreams did she ever expect to get to Hollywood, yet there she was, with a movie contract in her pocketbook and wearing a 5-year-old Hattie Carnegie dress that made her feel like a queen. The year was 1933, and Lucy was 21. She loved everything about movie making, the money, meeting all the different kinds of people, the high excitement of each day, and the talented technicians. Everything except having her eyebrows shaved off because they never grew back. When Roman Scandals ended, the Golden Girls were loaned out to 20th Century Fox, and Lucy was determined to stay in Hollywood. When her brother Freddie graduated from high school, he came out to Hollywood to live with her, and eventually Dee Dee, Daddy, and cousin Cleo came too. Keeping the family together seemed to give Lucy a sense of purpose. Lucy's second big break was with RKO Studios and the film Roberta. It was a 3-month contract that stretched to 7 years. While there, she met Ginger Rogers' mother, Leela, who was a mother to many young struggling starlets trying to work their way up to the top. She directed RKO's Little Theater and tutored promising actors and actresses. Leela asked Lucy, "What would you give to be a star in 2 years? Would you give me every breath you draw for 2 years? Would you work 7 days a week? Would you sacrifice all your social life?" "I certainly will," Lucy promised, and they began work immediately. Since A Films eluded Lucy, she became known as the Queen of B movies. At almost 28, she longed for the deep, enduring love of a man she could love in return, with children and recognition as a performer. Even though Five Came Back was a B movie, it was a hit, and it gave Lucy the boost her career needed. At last, she was being groomed for A films and was sent to New York City for personal appearances. The studio told her to be sure to see the Broadway hit Too Many Girls because they had bought the movie rights and she might get a starring role. The sensation of the show was a 22-year-old Cuban named Desi Arnaz. Lucy said he was the Elvis Presley of his day. During the show, she couldn't take her eyes off Desi, but it would be a while before she'd get to meet him. She was cast in the movie Dance Girl Dance, playing the role of a tough, wisecracking strip teaser. On one particular day of filming, she wore a slinky gold lame dress slid up to her thigh and sported a fake black eye where her lover had supposedly socked her. The New York cast of Too Many Girls was lunching at the studio commissary when Lucy appeared in costume. Desi reared back at the sight of her and gasped, "What a hunk of a woman." At the end of the day's shooting, Lucy washed her face, pulled her long hair back with a bow, and put on a yellow cashmere sweater and tight-fitting beige slacks. Desi didn't recognize her as the wild woman he met at lunch and had to be introduced all over again. He invited her to dinner and she accepted. She said she fell in love with him in 5 minutes. There was only one thing better than looking at Desi, and that was talking to him. He told her he was an only child born with a silver spoon in his mouth. His family were rich landowners who had cattle ranches, haciendas, townhouses, and a beach villa in Cuba. His father was a doctor of pharmacology, mayor of Santiago for 10 years, and his mother was a famous beauty heir to the Bacardi rum fortune. Then came the revolution. Desi's father, along with the rest of the Cuban Senate, were locked up, and all their family property was confiscated. They lost everything. When his father was finally released from prison, he went to Florida to start over again. 17-year-old Desi joined him in Miami soon after, penniless with only the clothes on his back. They lived in an unheated warehouse filled with rodents, but Desi didn't sit around feeling sorry for himself. He went out and got a variety of jobs. Eventually, he graduated from Miami's St. Patrick High School. In 1936, when Desi was 19, he heard that a big-time rumba band in Miami Beach needed a singing guitarist. He purchased a guitar at a pawn shop for $5, borrowed a suit, and sang what was later to become his signature song. Do you remember what it was? Babalu. Desi got the job, and the first thing he did was send for his mother. He started his own band, which was awful, so to make up for the lack of talent, he included the La Conga Cuban dance. As Desi explained it, you get in a big line and you hold the hips of the girl in front of you, and then you 1, 2, 3, kick. Soon there were conga lines all over the country. A New York agent spotted Desi, and the next thing he knew, he was in the headline attraction in New York City's La Conga nightclub. That's when he was offered the lead part in the Broadway show Too Many Girls, which Lucy later said turned out to be quite prophetic. More and more, Desi kept showing up on Lucy's doorstep. Everyone at the studio knew Lucy was starry-eyed over him, and most of them warned her against him. He was 6 years younger than her and a Catholic, and Lucy always claimed that she was a Protestant, even though she hadn't attended church since she lived with her step-grandparents. Their outlooks on life were very different, too. Desi was the Santiago prince who lived in large, extravagant homes, while Lucy was raised in a little house near the railroad tracks. She never even owned a bicycle as a kid, while Desi grew up with cars, speedboats, and horses. Desi believed that the man made all the decisions and women were to bear children and stay in the home. All Lucy's life, she had been taught to be strong, self-reliant, and independent. They both had incompatible egos and tempers, and on top of that, Desi was supposed to spend 6 months of the year in Hollywood and the other 6 months on the road. What kind of life would that be for a couple? Friends pointed out that Desi was a romantic who lived to enjoy life and never thought of tomorrow. Lucy was a level-headed realist who never lived beyond her means or went overboard drinking or gambling. The RKO bosses warned Lucy that Desi had a trail of broken hearts from Times Square to Sunset Boulevard to East Hampton. So one night at a small nightclub table, they agreed they could never marry. But on the morning of November 30th, 1940, Desi and Lucy eloped to Greenwich, Connecticut, with the intention of returning in time for Desi's noon show at the Roxy after a quick marriage ceremony. They spent 2 hours seeing a judge about waiving the 5-day waiting period and getting the necessary health examination. Instead of being married in the office of Judge O'Brien, as Desi had planned, the judge felt they needed a more romantic spot and drove them to the Byron River Beagle Club, an upscale hunting lodge. On the car radio driving back to New York, they heard the news reports of their elopement. Desi led Lucy on stage at the Roxy, where thousands of people roared their good wishes and pelted them with rice. Lucy said that was the most momentous day of her life. Their friends gave their marriage 6 months. Lucy gave it a week, and they made it almost to 20. Wanting to live in the open spaces of the San Fernando Valley, they purchased a little white ranch house on 5 acres in Chatsworth. They christened everything they owned Desi Lou, the combination of their names. More than anything else, Lucy and Desi wanted to co-star in a movie together, but they couldn't persuade the studio bosses. They decided to do a vaudeville act together to see how well it would go over. If it was successful, it might convince Hollywood. It was so good, it got them an offer from the Palladium in London, but they canceled when Lucy found out she was pregnant. Sadly, she lost the baby in the 3rd month of her pregnancy. Lucy's career was just getting into high gear when Desi was drafted in the Army in February of 1943. Desi was hoping to become a bombardier and go overseas, but during basic training, he broke his kneecap playing baseball, so his assignment was entertaining hospitalized servicemen. In 1945, Desi was released from the Army. With nothing happening for him in the movies, he asked to be released from MGM to put together a rumba band. Lucy went through a mild nervous breakdown during this time, so when Desi had his band and opened at the Cabana in New York City in 1946, Lucy took 6 months off of work and went with him. The movie industry was in a panic in 1948. Do you know why? Television. Movie theaters all over the country were closing as people stayed home with either their radio or their new television. During this time, Lucy did a radio series called My Favorite Husband, where she portrayed a wacky wife. While Lucy was knocking herself out with movie making and bond tours, Desi's nightlife had all Hollywood talking. It hurt and humiliated Lucy deeply. She decided on a desperate measure of divorce, knowing it would take a year in California to become final. In 1949, Desi suggested that they give their marriage another try and work on it again. Desi gave up his cross-country band tours and only took local engagements. Lucy promised to be more loving and understanding, and to prove her sincerity, she started taking Catholic instructions. Because they had eloped and were married by a judge, she thought their marriage lacked a sacred quality. So they were remarried in Our Lady of the Valley Church in Chatsworth, and Lucy promised to raise any children they might have as Catholics. CBS approached Lucy about transferring My Favorite Husband to television with her co-star Richard Deming. She demanded that Desi be cast as her leading man, which CBS initially refused. In 1950, Lucy and Desi decided once again that since nobody else seemed to have faith in them as a team, they'd form their own corporation and promote themselves, and Desilu Productions Incorporated was legally formed. As before, they put together a Mr. and Mrs. Vaudeville act and took it on tour. When word got around that they were good, 6 months of theater contracts materialized and another invitation to perform at the Palladium in London. It was deja vu because Lucy found out she was pregnant again, and they canceled, and she lost the baby in the 3rd month, just like before. She continued her weekly radio show, My Favorite Husband, and pleaded with her agent to find a way for her and Desi to do a television show together. 5 months after her second miscarriage, Lucy was pregnant again at almost 40 years of age. She canceled all her acting activities except the radio show and sat at home knitting and waiting. Lucy said the best year of her marriage to Desi was the months before and after the birth of their first child. There were no harsh words or upsets of any kind, and Desi hovered over her, attentive to her every need. When she was going into her 4th month of pregnancy, CBS suddenly agreed to financing a pilot for a television show featuring the two of them as a married couple, primarily because they didn't want NBC to snatch them. They had exactly 1 month to put the pilot together. For 10 years, they had been trying to become parents and co-stars, and now both were happening at lightning speed. Television was the enemy of Hollywood. If Lucy undertook the weekly television show and it flopped, she may never work in another movie. It also meant giving up the radio program, and Desi would have to cancel all his band engagements. It was a huge all-or-nothing gamble, but as we know, the gamble paid off. With the writers of My Favorite Husband, they dreamed up a set of television characters. Originally, they were going to be Lucy and Larry Lopez, but then they settled on Lucy and Ricky Ricardo. Desi would be a Cuban band leader who worked in New York City, and Lucy would be a wacky housewife with stage ambitions. They used part of their vaudeville act for the pilot. When Philip Morris agreed to sponsor the show, they thought they were on their way until the demand came that they would have to move to New York City. They refused. To make up for the geographical problems, Desi suggested filming the show live in front of an audience. A film show cost twice as much as a live one, and neither CBS or Philip Morris would put up any more money. So Desi made the offer that in return for a $1,000 weekly salary cut, they'd be given complete ownership of the show, and he would be the producer, which turned out to be a very wise deal for them. Lucy planned to have a natural delivery in late June, and happily waited and waited and waited. The weeks passed and still no baby. The doctor finally decided on a cesarean delivery because the baby was laying sideways with its head just under Lucy's rib cage. Lucy, spelled Lucia, Desiree Arnaz, was born on July 17, 1951, weighing 7 pounds, 8 ounces. Lyricist Eddie Maxwell wrote the words to a song in her honor, There's a Brand New Baby in Our House, and Desi sat up all night with his guitar composing the music. It was later used on the I Love Lucy show when little Ricky was born. 4 weeks after little Lucy was born, Mommy Lucy was back on the set of I Love Lucy, filming the series. On Friday evening, August 15th, 1951, the bleachers filled with 300 people, a cross-section of America, as Desi explained that they would be seeing a brand new kind of television show. The first 4 shows put them among the top 10 on television. The 20th show made them #1 on the air, and they stayed there for 3 incredible years. Desi and Lucy okayed each pillow, picture, and pot and pan that went into the Ricardos' apartment to make sure it was authentically middle income. If you remember, their dishware was Franciscan's ivy pattern, and I have a cup and saucer of that pattern right here. The show changed the Monday night habits of America. Between 9 and 9:30, the taxis disappeared from the streets of New York City. Marshall Field Department Store in Chicago hung up a sign, "We love Lucy too, so from now on, we'll be open Thursday nights instead of Monday." Telephone calls across the nation dropped sharply during that half hour. And in Detroit, the water levels in the reservoirs took a drastic drop while whole families put off going to the bathroom until I Love Lucy ended.
Oh my God.
In May 1952, Desi and Lucy learned they were having another baby. They decided to continue the show and have a baby on the TV show simultaneously with the delivery of Lucy's real baby. No actress had ever appeared in a stage play or on television when she was obviously pregnant, but the CBS censor allowed it. The birth of little Desi went down as one of the great events of 1953. His birth was scheduled for January 19th at Cedars of Lebanon Hospital, the same day that Lucy Ricardo's fictional baby was going to arrive. When Lucy awoke after her cesarean section, she found Desi sitting on her bed sobbing. At last, he had a son and an heir to carry on his family name and traditions. He threw his hands up in the ceiling and shouted, "Now we got everything." Within minutes, the news had gone completely around the world. Lucy and Desi had to hire 4 secretaries just to handle all the congratulatory mail and write thank yous for the hundreds of gifts that were sent. That same day, little Desi was born. 44 million Americans, or 70% of all U.S. households, watched the arrival of Ricky Ricardo Jr. on the I Love Lucy show. It was the most watched program in television history. The next day, Eisenhower was inaugurated as president, and the I Love Lucy show had higher ratings than the inauguration. Walter Winchell said on the air, "This was a banner week. The nation got a man and Lucy got a boy." The popularity of the show was so great, it was possible to furnish a house and dress a whole family with items carrying the I Love Lucy label. With the exception of Dwight Eisenhower and his wife Mamie, who were avid I Love Lucy fans, Lucy and Desi were the most publicized couple in America. Desi and Lucy sold their Chatsworth Ranch in 1954 and bought a white Georgian brick house in Beverly Hills, right next door to Jack Benny. Desi also acquired acreage in Palm Springs, where he built a lavish motel resort. Desilu Studios required 18-hour days for Desi, dealing with big business squabbles, clashing personalities, and long rehearsals. Business meetings went on into the night, and in New York, telephone calls began at 6 or 7 a.m. When enough aggression accumulated, a button-off shirt at home could set him off, making Lucy realize how much the strain of their snowballing empire was eating away at him. For escape, he drank, caroused with women, gambled, golfed, or spent time at his new motel or on his yacht. On the set, Lucy's attention to detail began to annoy him. Finally, they decided to stay on as president and vice president of Desilu, but to cut down on the work schedule. In 1957, they finished the last of the half-hour I Love Lucy shows and signed a contract with Westinghouse for a series of monthly one-hour specials called the Lucy Desi Comedy Special. Later that year, Desi bought RKO Studios. They now owned more sound stages than 20th Century Fox and MGM, but he and Lucy were growing farther and farther apart. Lucy didn't berate Desi in her autobiography for his drinking, gambling, and womanizing problem, But she did say in the spring of 1959, she made her last unsuccessful attempt at a reconciliation when they took their children, then ages 7 and 6, on a trip to Europe. It was a miserable trip. By the spring of 1960, the good-natured kidding that used to animate the studio, it just disappeared entirely, and all the fun was gone. Finally, Desi told Lucy he wanted a divorce, and she had an attorney in his office within 20 minutes. Her grounds were extreme mental cruelty. In December 1960, friends introduced Lucy to Gary Morton, a nightclub performer doing stand-up comedy. They clicked right away. After 11 months of dating, they were married on November 19, 1961, in New York City by Dr. Norman Vincent Peale at the Marble Collegiate Church. It was a small, intimate wedding with only 40 people in attendance. In 1962, the Lucy Show television series began at Desi's suggestion. He was still head of Desilu and executive producer of the new show, but having both Desi and Gary on the set at the same time just didn't work out. Desi was ready to retire, so Lucy bought him out for $3 million and became the first woman to run one of Hollywood's major production entities. She was now president of Desilu. Lucy's autobiography ended at this point, but in the spring of 1968, an entirely new TV series, Here's Lucy, began. Her real-life children, Lucy and Desi Jr., were in the show with her. The series ran for 6 seasons and ended in 1974. Lucy retired from television in 1974 after being on CBS for 23 consecutive years, a television industry record. She won 4 Emmys and numerous other awards. She was featured on the very first cover of TV Guide and 39 other covers throughout her career, more than any other celebrity. Retirement was short-lived, as Lucy soon re-entered the entertainment business for several more years. In 1988, it marked her 55th anniversary in show business, and in May of that same year, she suffered a minor heart attack and stroke that left her partially paralyzed on her right side. As soon as she was allowed to get out of bed, she began physical therapy, determined to make a full recovery. In March of 1989, she teamed up with Bob Hope for the Academy Awards Spectacular. Hope recalled that her hand felt clammy and she seemed a bit wobbly when they stepped on the stage. 3 weeks after the Oscar telecast, Lucy's aorta ruptured. Open heart surgery was performed, but a couple of days later, on April 26, while still in intensive care, she suffered a full cardiac arrest and doctors were unable to get her heart started again. Lucy died 4 months shy of her 78th birthday. Like Desi, she had a lifelong addiction to smoking that began in her teen years. Lucy and Gary were married 27 years when she passed away. At Lucy's request, she was cremated and the ashes buried at Forest Lawn Cemetery in Los Angeles in a private ceremony. But somehow, that resting place just didn't seem right. So in 2002, her children moved her remains back to her hometown in Jamestown, New York, at the cemetery where her family plot was with her parents, brother, and maternal grandparents. She left instructions in her will for a memorial gathering a month after her death, which her children honored. Appropriately, it was held on Mother's Day. It was more of a picnic than a wake and was held outdoors at a ranch in Mandeville Canyon near Los Angeles. About 50 friends and relatives gathered to honor her and dine on her favorite foods: baked ham, baked beans, potato salad, coleslaw, and watermelon. No eulogies were given, but favorite memories were exchanged while her favorite album of Bobby Darin blasted from the loudspeakers. Gary Morton and Lucy's children received so many requests for some kind of public remembrance that special memorial masses were held simultaneously at 3 Catholic churches in Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago, and all were packed out. Lucy said neither she nor Desi were ever the same physically or mentally after their breakup, and close friends said they never stopped loving each other. Work on Desi's autobiography went well until he reached the part where he had to write about his divorce from Lucy. Then he got very emotional, realizing what a rotten husband he had been. In the book's epilogue, he said, "All I can say is that I love Lucy very much, and in my own and perhaps peculiar way, I will always love her. We spent 20 years together. Many happy moments and many unhappy moments came and went during that time. It is a precious God-given gift that I remember only the happy moments. I hope she was given the same gift." Regarding the I Love Lucy show, Lucy was the show. Viv, Fred, and I were just props, darn good props, but props nevertheless. And I Love Lucy was never just a title. So I hope you enjoyed that and learned something you didn't know. If you have any questions, I'll just kind of stay after, and you can see me, and hopefully I can answer them.